I am here with Kathrin Eder, who has been the head production designer on BMF or Black Mafia Family and the newest Hellraiser remake. So, well, is there a particular project you'd like to start off with, or?
Hi, no, I'm actually okay either way, however you want to handle it. Two very different projects. So one a TV series about 80s Detroit and the other one a franchise horror movie.
Mhm. I guess personally, I kind of want to do the Hellraiser one first, since
That
like
sounds great.
I'm a big Hellraiser fan. Uh, Specifically, I want to ask, when working on the movie and making like creative decisions, did you think of it as a remake or sequel to the original Hellraiser, or did you focus on making its own making its own identity as a unique project? How did this affect like creative choices in particular?
Yeah, I think that David, our director, David Bruckner, called it a reboot, which essentially definitely became an homage to the very first Hellraiser. And we definitely pulled information from the original book and definitely tried to reference the original movie. However, thematically in the screenplay and the entire world of the story went to a different level. I think we've expanded to a more present day society with themes that nowadays are possibly more accurate than back in the days. The BDSM look back in the days was something very fresh and awe-inspiring, and I think we've tried that out in the movies over the last 30 years. So in the writing, the themes became larger and went more into addiction and seduction and how an individual deals with those dynamics. And so while we tried to honor Clive Barker's original writings and also the original identity of the movie, we tried to create something fresh as well. And I think it turned out on various levels. We had a higher budget than the original film, so the world building became much bigger. The mansion from a small nuclear family home became the mansion of a egomaniac millionaire. And within that, we wanted to also draw a very clear line of the world that Riley is in, kind of a Boston-esque city in Northeast America, and then that threshold that she crosses when she enters the world of Void, Roland Void and all of his obsessions and addictions. So I think the design was inspired partially by the original film and Clive Barker's work, but then also by the geography of the new script. It's setting place in the United States, and then the world building capacity that came with a higher budget.
Yeah, excellent. I especially want to highlight the mansion of Roland Boyd, because that all of the sets affiliated with that location, those look absolutely amazing.
Oh, thank
Uh,
you.
yeah. So, what were your favorite ways that you made that set distinct from not only other sets in the movie, but also from the average like kind of abandoned mansion that we've seen like that is basically a staple of horror movies at this point?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think that was a big, it was kind of a big work in progress dialogue that David and I started very early on. We were given the luxury of having a concept design phase where David and I were literally able to sit and break down the script scene by scene and really talk about Roland Boyd as a character. And it became very clear that he's kind of an accumulation and a reflection of a lot of egomaniacs that we are faced with in our present day society. So there was a lot of inspiration looking at a lot of you know very wealthy men in the United States that that assume power and act as they please upon it because they think they're invincible. And in logistical aspects, the mansion was quite a challenge because we weren't able to find an actual mansion where we filmed that in Belgrade. It's very different in a geographical sense, in the sense of the history of architecture, in a cultural sense. And so we found ourselves realizing that we will have to piece together this mansion from filming locations that we augment and sets that we build. And our original design started with the showroom because we knew a big part of the second half of the movie would set place in that showroom. And we knew from the script that it was geographically located in the center of the mansion. And so we started with that and a concept for that, which I can share with you if you like for your written interview, if you'd like to see some visuals. And then we scouted locations and tried to find places that have certain architectural details that are similar, that then we could marry together and create something cohesive. And it was really wonderful. And the journey I enjoyed so much because I hadn't done anything like it on that grandeur and with that kind of boldness before. So that was a really beautiful invitation and we had a lot of fun with it. From like choosing the color palettes to the challenges that we couldn't find any high-end furniture in Serbia, and we had to end up hiring set designers to custom design those furniture pieces and then create them just for the movie. So all of it together was pretty beautiful experience. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah. Another aspect of the mansion I'd really love to highlight were like the secret tunnels that were were like under the mansion, like not only do they lead to like some really interesting horror set pieces like of the whole man inside the walls and stuff like that, but they also like are really disturbing when you stop for a moment to think about the implication of them, like.
Yes, and those secret passageways, like you're so right when you say the implication of them, because it immediately calls for a sense of wanting to control everything that is happening. But there's also a sense of voyeurism, and all of that combines again to that essence of power, which is really what Roland Boyd wants. He wants power. And we had a very detailed map, although it was like between David and I kind of hand sketches that then we translated into 3D or proper elevations, how those hallways need to be configured in order to make sense for the lobby and the little reading room and the lounge and the main showroom. We did end up creating most of the hallway as a separate set piece, and then with cinematography and editing created the illusion that they were tied together because it ended up being too difficult creating one large set piece where we integrated everything. But we definitely had pieces and fragments of those hallways alongside our key sets at all times because they were such a big story point. And I love that actually stood out to you.
Thank you. Yeah. And another aspect of the house is that like it's got this control panel that like changes not only like what rooms of the house are like accessible to certain people, but also like the giant grate that like covers the whole house and like ends up featuring majorly in the climax, of course. So I was wondering if you had a favorite like augmentation or room in the house that like with how it kind of worked.
I mean, I definitely like the cage structure on the outside. That was a really great thing to develop, and most of it was done in VFX, but our concept designers and we worked together on a bunch of different versions of it to really figure out what would be Cenobite worthy and what is still human enough for a person like Roland Voigt to create it. So that was a very fun set piece to work on. And then on the actual location, we built about 20 feet of it alongside the entire front of the house and 20 feet high, so VFX could add on to it. In regards to my favorite location in that house, I mean, it's hard because there were so many, but a big impact was definitely done when we created the lobby set, which is the party scene in the very beginning of the film, where our young man wanders through a party and then realizes that he could get an audience with Roland Voigt. And the reason why I like that set so much is because the before and after image was so impactful. It was just a white room before, and then we added all these layers. And it was one of the first sets that we opened up in principal photography. And I think he put the whole crew into the mindset of, this is what we're doing. It's not just a horror movie. It's a thriller with horror elements, and there's some real effort created for the world building. And I think it set us all off to a motivated start, which was really nice. And I enjoyed, like, even though a lot of the details didn't make it into the film, but we had like, it was all about hedonism. And we had like a beautiful food spread, and we had all these like tiny little details there that really set a beautiful tone. I'm sorry, I have to blow my nose for a minute. My cold is bothering me. 1 second, sorry. I'm back. Hi.
Right. Yeah, obviously one of the most talked about parts of the new Hellraiser movie was the return of the Cenobites. I know a lot of that was a lot of the return of them that's been focused on has been the makeup and the props and the actors' performance. But I also want to highlight the redesign of the labyrinth. What were some ways that you updated the labyrinth, and how, and all the different ways that the Cenobites interact with our world?
So the labyrinth had a few different stages. We actually only recreated the part of, or we recreated some parts of the labyrinth, but the key part that we recreated was the van scene, where we lose one of our main characters, where they're driving on the road and then suddenly she finds herself in a treacherous last few minutes, or in a moment with that she shares with Pinhead. That was the hallway we recreated, and there was a lot of conversation with David as to how we homage the labyrinth, because it's something that he wanted to hold true from the original movie. So we did studies of stone walls and how withered they are. The Romanesque arches was something that we wanted to hold on to in terms of design. And for the large labyrinth that you see later on, we actually brought on board a miniature company out of Los Angeles. And they really trained in building those beautiful miniatures, and they took over most of it. So we submitted some reference images and a list of things that were important to David and to the cinematography. And then they took it from there. So I can't even take much credit for the labyrinth, just besides a few small set pieces. They really did all the work on that. And I thought it looks beautiful. I really enjoyed the end result.
Yeah, excellent. And from there, I think we're ready to move on to BMF, Black Mafia Family. So season 2 just premiered recently, so I know you can't share any spoilers yet, but are there any scenes or sets that you had a lot of fun creating or dressing for the show this season?
Yeah, I mean, what's so beautiful, or what's so compelling about BMF, Black Mafia Family, is that it's based on the lives of two brothers that really lived. They're still alive. And they grew up in Detroit and wanted to escape their poverty and their systematic poverty, their generational poverty, and started the largest organization of crack cocaine dealing in the United States. and probably worldwide. And they were able to succeed with their organization for almost 20 years. The other aspect about BMF that I really enjoy is that we have direct dialogue with the family, the mother and the sister, and a bunch of consultants that really offer a lot of honesty and advice and insight into how it all started and their personal home, and just, things from family photos that made it very compelling to recreate. And on a TV series compared to a feature film, you have less prep, but you have so many more sets. Like in a 10 episode show, you can easily have 250 sets. And I think we had 250 sets in the first season, and we have the same amount of sets in the second. And what happened in the second season is that I think we built from a theme of the first season, breaking away from poverty. The theme of the second season was really to the open road, and how they branched out from Detroit to start a new playground in Atlanta, where we're actually filming. And so with that and their increased wealth, there were very large sets, but then also like just going back into the late 80s and trying to recreate the Las Vegas airport, or a fun Las Vegas hotel, or a AAA back in the day, or a big gambling hall. There's so many sets, and because it's a period piece, you have to pay attention to each individual space, because nowadays things just look so different, and items are different, and color palettes, and furniture, everything is different nowadays. So we really tried and to pay a lot of attention to each individual set. Some of my favorites, I mean, there's a car wash that's going to come up that I really enjoyed. We recreated a Sears, which isn't really around anymore, which I really loved. Then there was a romantic scene in a chocolate kind of candy store that was really nice. All the before and afters are usually what's gratifying to me, because the before is an empty space, and then the after is something that has color and texture and character. And I think there's some very nice, successful sets in there.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned like the fact that it's an 80s, that it being a period piece about the 80s, like you have to try and make it true to the era. What are some of the ways that you most enjoy doing that? I know that it's a kind of combination of like props and sets and clothing and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's diving in when it comes to the 80s and the transition from the 80s to the 90s. My background is social and cultural anthropology, and what I really enjoy about applying the skill set that I learned in social and cultural anthropology here is that you dig in kind of layered questions of saying, what community are we looking at? And then you kind of narrow in on the family, on the character, and then their socioeconomic circumstance, which then really brings us back to how that space could have looked back in the 80s or 90s. And then that needs to get offset with pop culture and anything that inspired young people, because in the end of the day, our main characters are late teens, early 20s, and most of them were young men, and most of them loved their music and their specific bands and certain hangout spots, and fashion was a big deal, and jewelry became an even bigger deal. So there's research from street fashion that Jamal Shabazz photographed down to Henry Taylor paintings. Like it's such a broad, beautiful world where you can access knowledge from so many different angles. And I think by looking closely and kind of determining certain key aspects like music, fashion, jewelry, and then the polarity of a certain poverty, but within a community that was very cherished, to luxury, like you have that constant polarization. You can find a very compelling world in that, and then you can start playing with color and specific patterns. Wallpaper was a big deal. Certain materials like velvet or chrome and very thick structured carpet was a big deal in the 80s. So there's so much fun that you can have with it. And I think the very rewarding thing about it is that every time our crew, when we open a set, and the crew that's old enough to having experienced the 80s and the 90s, when they step on set, you hear a lot of, oh my God, I remember my grandmother had this, and oh my God, I had the sofa like this. So there's this shared memory of items that we are able to collect and bring to set, that also on top of it is the sugar coating, I'd say.
Right. Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I have a couple more general questions also.
Yeah.
So yeah, production design, obviously like a lot of people who have studied film like know what that is, but like average audiences still don't fully understand like all of the work that comes into like creating the sets, dressing them, and making sure like continuity is kept between scenes and all that kind of stuff. So do you have any resources or tips for people who want to learn more about production design, or like the general things that they should look out for in their in order to engage with their media?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, because I didn't know production design existed, and I was already studying film, and I had no idea what the world actually entailed. And that was 20 years ago. So I think nowadays, with social media and much more web content, there are a lot of resources. I would say production design, the key thing to understand is production design is storytelling, and it's most often nonverbal storytelling. So when you read a script, let ideas about space and human patterns wash over you, and trust your instinct on that. Like when I read a script, I always immediately notate certain things that come to mind, movie references or spatial references or colors. And nonverbal storytelling really can include so many different tools, from color palettes to architecture, but also sociology, psychology, anthropology, geography. Because in the end of the day, what we do as production designers is that we mirror or recreate human patterns. And so it's not necessarily about only creating pretty spaces for camera. It's really about creating spaces that human beings change with the way they act in those spaces. A key tool that I found very, very useful in the beginning was reading up on mythology and understanding that the main storylines that have been told over and over again. I highly recommend Joseph Campbell, and really honing in on the basics of storytelling, and then using that as a structure and a jumping board of how you can translate that into world building. Yeah, and there's the Production Designers Collective, which has a website. You can be a member if you're a production designer, but a lot of knowledge is shared with anybody who is interested in production design. And then the Art Directors Guild of America publishes a magazine by month. No, hold on. Every 2 months, every 3 months. That's called Perspective Magazine. And Perspective Magazine, the PDF document, is actually available on the Art Directors Guild website to download. And that's something I did before I became a member of the ADG. I would just read those beautiful articles of production designers that contributed and talk about their project management and how they went about designing a specific show or film. So those are two resources that are more specific towards my job and my profession, I think. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. And final question, what's your favorite production that you've ever worked on?
Oh, that's so hard. I had a feeling you might ask that question. And I think that every production has its own beauty. Like my very first feature film, Life Happens, with director Kat Coiro, was something that meant so much to me because it reflected a lot of the life that I lived in Los Angeles. It's about two young women, and we went into it together. Then there was Stockholm, Pennsylvania with director Nicole Beckwith. That was probably the first film where I was really allowed to create a super cohesive world and where we went into a lot of detail. Then there was The Night House with David Bruckner. That was just a whole new level. It was my first horror film, and I thought I never could do a horror film because I'm terrified of it. So there's a beautiful friendship that developed out of it. There were a lot of music videos that I cherish. It's always about the bond that I develop with people more than the project. And filmmaking is such an intimate process that I think sharing time with collaborators and then actually being able to bring your own life experience to a project and being welcome to share is something that's really rewarding. And there's a lot of those projects throughout the last 15 years that I really cherish and I'm grateful for. Yeah. So I can't tell you which one is my favorite. It's very hard. Like I have favorite parts about every project.
Yeah. Honestly, that sounds like the kind of attitude like that I hope everyone gets to have when they work on projects and all that kind of stuff. Like approaching everything with a new with the idea of doing something new and getting to have fun with it.
I think so too. Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
always that like, okay, I've never done this before. So how do we approach it? You know, that storytelling that and you're together with a new pool of people and you have to figure out their personalities and how they like to communicate. So I think like if we learn anything in the film industry, then it is that we learn a lot about communicating. And that's a beautiful gift to have.